This is my presentation on the life of Cristo Ferreira, a Jesuit missionary. And he actually may be someone that you all are familiar with. He was recently featured in the film Silence by Martin Scorsese about the persecution of Jesuits in Japan. And Father Ferreira had a very interesting and suffering-ridden life. And so as we look into his story and reflect upon it, I hope that we can find some encouragement and edification for our own lives. Cristo Ferreira, he was born in a small town in Portugal in the year 1580. He joined the Jesuit order at a very young age of 16. The Jesuit order was also known as the Society of Jesus, and it was started by Ignatius of Loyola, the man you see depicted on the slide. Now, the Jesuits were well known for their four vows of poverty, chastity, general obedience, and a specific vow of obedience with regard to worldwide mission. Now, after completing 2 years of his noviceship at the age of 18, Ferreira began his university studies in Portugal with the order. His desire for mission was met 2 years later in the year 1600, when at the age of 20, alongside 19 other Jesuits, left Portugal for the furthest outpost of the Portuguese colonial empire at the time, Macau. Now, he studied theology in Macau for 4 more years and was finally ordained a priest in the year 1608 at the age of 28. He served his first Mass at Christmas, and this is now 10 years after completing his noviceship and 12 years after giving himself into the service of the Jesuits. The following year after his ordination, he left for Japan. He left for Japan at the age of 29. He was very well versed in Japanese. He was gifted in this aspect. He had studied the Japanese language in Macau. Now that he was in Japan, he continued his studies, now in the seminary in a place called Arima. But this was obviously alongside his service in the Jesuit mission. Now, in the region of Arima, there was a local leader called the Daimo, and this Daimo had been a supporter of the Jesuit mission. But in the year 1612, he was actually banished from the domain and was condemned to death. Now, he was a local Japanese. This caused some concern among the Jesuit mission because it might have been indicative of persecution to come. So, as a response, the missionaries and the mission, including the seminary, decided to move from Arima to Nagasaki. Ferreira moved alongside with them. But in that same year of the move, Ferreira was further sent from Nagasaki to Kyoto. Ferreira was now 32 years old at this point, and he was assigned to take over the role of treasurer of the entire Jesuit movement in Japan. So we can see that Ferreira's commitment to the Jesuit order has now spanned about 15 years. He's been growing and serving. He's an ordained priest. He's serving Mass. He's teaching and preaching. And now he's serving as the treasurer. So, all in all, he is a very competent and committed member of the community who is serving well and fruitfully. Now, persecution began intensifying across Japan um, at the end of 1613, the church in Kyoto, they celebrated liturgy peacefully. This was their Christmas liturgy. There were about 30 to 40,000 Catholics living in that place. But immediately after Christmas, an edict of religious census was issued for Christians. This obviously caused a lot of pressure. Priests, Christians, brothers, and catechists were facing growing persecution. The priests and missionaries were told to move to Nagasaki to await further instructions, but some missionaries, including Father Ferrer, they secretly stayed in Kyoto. The reason for the persecution was revealed, and the shogun had actually feared that the Catholic missionaries had sought to usurp his power and rob his kingdom through the preaching of the gospel. So through this intensifying time of persecution, Ferrero, he worked as the treasurer of the Jesuit order in Japan. Now, through the period of persecution, some were exiled, arrested, and tortured. And one of Ferreira's services in this time was writing about the torture in the region of Unzen. Now, the region of Unzen was infamous for its torture because of the hot sulfur springs that were there. Now, priests and Jesuits were often tied to crosses, and they had ladles with holes in them through which water was poured on them. Now, the holes functioned to lengthen the torture and make it a more painful process. Father Ferreira wrote about this torture and informed the church back in Portugal as he continued to serve in the region. He eventually ended up fulfilling the role of provincial at the age of 53. He had now been in Japan for over 20 years. Now, the provincial was the general overseer of the entire Jesuit movement in Japan. Persecution reached its peak between the years of 1633 and 1634, and a new form of torture had been developed. This form of torture was called hanaturushi. And if we look on the slide, we can see this form of torture being depicted. A person would be hung upside down. And this was obviously only for Christians. A person would be hung upside down and two boards put around their neck so that they couldn't see out, and they would be put into this pit. Um, Sometimes in the pit there would be feces to further make the torture more horrible. Um, this method of torture was incredibly painful because of the blood pressure that would build up around the head, leading to pain, exhaustion. These people weren't fed food, and quite frankly were suspended between life and death. The only method of escape was to apostatize and deny their faith. The longest that anyone had ever endured this torture was 3 entire days. Now, Ferreira and 6 other priests were arrested on October 18, 1933, and they were subjected to this torture. All died except for Ferreira, who, after 5 excruciating hours, he actually ended up apostatizing. Now, this news was widely spread around the country and sent back home. This was a great victory for Japan, but obviously a travesty for um, the Jesuit order and for Ferreira himself. The Japanese government took this and used this to their advantage. The Jesuit order dismissed him from the order at the age of 56. That would have been his 40th anniversary of joining the order. Many didn't believe this and loved Ferrer so much that they sought to go to Japan to convince him out of it. 3 independent rescue missions were launched, but all the Jesuit brothers who embarked on them were captured, tortured, and beheaded. This obviously was a great success of the Japanese anti-Christian movement. Um, Ferrer ended up living as the Japanese Sawano Chuan. Um, he lived as a Japanese man and was given a Japanese wife, a small poor house. He was given a family temple to belong to, as all Japanese citizens did. We're not so sure what happened at the end of his life. We know he served as a translator, and there are reports that at the age of 80 he possibly denounced his apostasy. These, however, can't be confirmed. All we know for sure is that Ferreira breathed his last in Japan decades after he landed there. He died in the land that he had come to serve. Now, as we look at Ferreira's life and reflect upon it, I realize that there's so much that we don't know. But one thing that is characterized in his life is the image of the cross. Um, Throughout the 16th and 17th centuries, the persecution, we see that the cross was such a prominent image, and even in Ferreira's life as well. Ferreira picked up his cross at 16 when he joined the Jesuits. He picked up his cross when he went to Macau at 20. He picked up his cross as he learnt Japanese, and he picked up his cross as he served as treasurer and provincial over the Jesuits in Japan. He picked up his cross as he bled for 5 hours, upside down, delirious, losing consciousness, in a pain we can't even imagine. Now, I don't know what happened for sure, but I pray that in some way at the end of his life, Father Ferreira picked up his cross one final time for our Lord Jesus Christ. Now, as we look at Father Ferreira's life, there's some learning points that I have. And firstly, there's the necessity of the cruciform way of the Christian life. That is, the Christian life is in the shape of a cross, and we each have our own cross to carry. Secondly, the mission of the church is pain ridden, and carrying our cross will not be easy. We see that in Father Ferreira's life and the torture of so many priests. And finally, only God decides our fate. And only God knows how we have carried our cross. So instead of jumping to conclusions about what Ferreira's life was like, I hope that we are all encouraged and edified to prayerfully hope that Ferreira was found faithful and that we be found faithful before Christ too. Here are some references that I have, and that's the end of my presentation. May we be found faithful. Thank you.